Let's open our Bibles again to Jeremiah chapter 50, and we're going to pick up where we left off yesterday at verse number 41. Now, while you're getting yourself to that passage, I want to remind you that this is the prophet Jeremiah writing after Nebuchadnezzar has become king of the Babylonian Empire for several years. Zedekiah is the final king of southern Judah, and the exiles have been taken away by Nebuchadnezzar to live permanently in the Babylonian area. And God has told them that they should be ready for the long haul. They're going to be there at least 70 years, and that they should be seeking the welfare of that country, of that region that they're living in. Now, at the same time, God is having Jeremiah tell the people, yes, Babylon is going to eventually be judged by God, just like he used Babylon to judge Judah. And so in this extended prophecy, chapters 50 and 51, God describes how Babylon will fall and how they will be scared themselves and lose their main cities, and particularly Babylon City. It'll become a ruin that people are not living in any longer, and they themselves will die in large numbers and go into exile and things of that nature. So this is supposed to be giving the Judeans a heads up that Babylon will not always be in control. And once their judgment comes, the Judeans will be given the chance to return to their ancestral home, if they wish to do so, which is interesting that only a small number of people living in exile in Babylon at the time that the Medes and the Persians take over will make the choice to go back to Judea and Jerusalem to start over again. Well, that's enough introduction. Let's pick it up in verse 41 of chapter 50. Behold, a people comes from the north, a mighty nation, and many kings are stirring from the farthest parts of the earth. Now, that's a reference, I believe, to the Medes and the Persians, which from the perspective of Jeremiah, who's offering this prophecy, is the north. And so I don't think it has a relationship between Babylon and Media-Persia, because they're actually east and west of one another. Verse 42, they shall lay hold of bow and spear. They are cruel and have no mercy. The sound of them is like the roaring of the sea. They ride on horses, arrayed as a man for battle against you, O daughter of Babylon. Now, when Jeremiah was describing the coming of Babylon against the nations of the Middle East, including Judea, he used some of the same language about bows and spears and no mercy and like a wave crashing against the shore. So now the tables are turned. Prophetically, Babylon is the one that's going to get hit. Verse 43, the king of Babylon heard the report of them, and his hand fell helpless. Anguish seized him, pain as of a woman in labor. And so the last king, and for Bible purposes, the last crown prince of Babylon, which you will find him mentioned in Daniel chapter number 5. Belshazzar, I believe is his name. He is going to be scared to death of what will happen to him when the Babylonians are overrun by the Medo-Persian forces, and with good reason, because he will die that night that they take Babylon City. It's the writing of the handwriting on the wall episode in the book of Daniel that is tied to that final king. Verse 44, behold, Like a lion coming up from the thicket of the Jordan against a perennial pasture, I will suddenly make them run away from her, and I will appoint over her whomever I choose. For who is like me? Who can summon me? What shepherd can stand before me? So God likens the coming of the Medes and the Persians against Babylon, like a lion coming out of the thick undergrowth near the Jordan River up to a sheep pasture. Who's going to be able to stop that? And of course, God's the one that is doing this, so who's going to stop him? Verse 45, therefore, hear the plan that he who has against Babylon, and the purposes that he's formed against the land of the Chaldeans. Surely the little ones of their flock shall be dragged away. Surely their fold shall be appalled at their fate. At the sound of the capture of Babylon, the earth shall tremble, and her cry shall be heard among the nations. It will be a pretty big deal when the Babylonians are overrun by the Medes and the Persians. Chapter 51, thus says he who is, behold, I will stir up the spirit of a destroyer against Babylon, against the inhabitants of Leb-Kamai. And Leb-Kamai has something to do with a heart, which is probably another name for the heart of Babylon or Chaldea. Verse 2, I will send to Babylon winnowers, and they shall winnow her, and they shall empty her land when they come against her from every side on the day of trouble. Winnowing, remember, is the process of throwing the grain mixture up in the air and allowing the prevailing winds to blow the chaff off to one side and then leave only the kernels of desired grain to drop down and be collected. And so Babylon is going to be winnowed by those that come in. They're going to destroy a lot of what they don't want and then collect up what they do want. Verse 3, let not the archer bend his bow, let him not stand up in his armor. Spare not her young men, devote to destruction all her army. So God basically saying, no one's going to get away. It is going to be a massacre. They shall fall down slain in the land of the Chaldeans and wounded in her streets. For Israel and Judah have not been forsaken by their God, he who is of the hosts, but the land of the Chaldeans is full of guilt against the Holy One of Israel. Now, these prophecies are being communicated as comfort to those that have gone into exile, to let them know, yes, Babylon has been rather rough on the Judeans because of the judgment of God. But Babylon will be accountable for their overreaching and their acting and over judgment of Judea. And eventually God will punish them. Flee from the midst of Babylon, let everyone save his life. Be not cut off in her punishment, for this is the time of he who is his vengeance, the repaying he is rendering her. Babylon was a golden cup in he who is his hand, making all the earth drunken. The nations drank of her wine, therefore the nations went mad. That might remind you that God tasked Jeremiah to go around to all the different countries of the Middle East at one point in his ministry with a symbolic cup of judgment that the person in leadership was supposed to drink. And this was a foreshadowing of the coming of the Babylonians as God's judgment. So here it is being described. Babylon used to be that golden cup, was used as God's golden cup of judgment. But eventually, they will have to drink of the judgment. We'll also notice that in the New Testament book of Revelation, we'll talk about the golden cup that is in the hands of codename Babylon, Mystery Babylon, and she is drunken with the blood of the saints. And that's what brings God's judgment against that Babylonian symbol. Verse number 8, suddenly Babylon has fallen and been broken. Wail for her. Take balm for her pain. Perhaps she may be healed. Now that is an interesting thing to insert here, that maybe there's a little hope for any Babylonians that repent, for those that will listen to the word of the Lord from the representatives of the Jewish faith that are living right there in Babylon, and from that perhaps be redeemed. We would have healed Babylon, but she is not healed. Now that's as a whole. Forsake her, and let us go each to his country, for her judgments has reached up to heaven and has been lifted up even to the skies. Some of that same language is in the book of Revelation. But after Babylon is overrun by the Medes first and then the Persians afterward, that's when Cyrus the Great will then open the door of return to all ethnic Israelis so that they can go back to their own country. And apparently it was something that was offered to other ethnic groups as well. Verse 10, he who is has brought about our vindication. Come, let us declare in Zion, that's one of the symbolic names for Jerusalem, particularly the Temple Mount, the word of he who is our God. So when the opportunity comes, you need to resort to the word of God. Sharpen the arrows, take up the shields. He who is has stirred up the spirit of the kings of the Medes. Now, this is the first time that we can point to very specific connection to the history that we know, that God used the Medes and their associated people group, the Persians, to carry out his destruction of Babylon. So he who is has stirred up the spirit of the kings of the Medes, because his purpose concerning Babylon is to destroy it. For that is the vengeance of he who is, the vengeance for his temple. Set up a standard against the walls of Babylon. Make the watch strong. Set up watchmen. Prepare the ambushes. For he who is has both planned and done what he spoke concerning the inhabitants of Babylon. So get ready to overrun it. O you who dwell by many waters, rich in treasures, your end has come. The thread of your life is cut. That's kind of ancient talk for, your life coming to an end. You're being cut off the loom of the fates, I think, in some of the different mythologies. But this dwelling of by many waters, Babylon city was particularly located on the Euphrates River. It also had other canals that were cut in nearby. The Tigris River was not very far away. The Persian Gulf not very far away. So there were lots of waters. It's also interesting that in the taking of Babylon City, the story goes that Babylon City thought that it was impregnable because of its high walls. And so what happens is the Medes and their Persian allies send in a strike force by means of the river. And once they get inside the river gate, then they kill the watchmen that are few in number and open the gates and take the city intact. So interesting connections to the prophecies here. He who is of the hosts has sworn by himself, surely I will fill you with men, as many as locusts, and they shall raise the shout of victory over you. So locusts often are used as a simile for hordes of military members coming against another army or against a city. Verse 15, it is he who made the earth by his power, who established the world by his wisdom, by his understanding, stretched out the heavens. So here's a description of God the Creator. When he utters his voice, there is tumult of waters in the heavens, and he makes the mist rise from the ends of the earth. He makes lightning for the rain, and he brings forth the wind from his storehouses. So God is the God that put the whole weather pattern in place. Every man is stupid and without knowledge. Now that's pretty strong language, but it's in reference to idolatry, which is stupid and without thinking. Every goldsmith is put to shame by his idols, for his images are false. There is no breath in them. They are worthless, a work of delusion. At the time of their punishment, they shall perish. So idols can't help themselves. They have to be carried everywhere. They have to be propped up. They even have to be nailed down sometimes to keep them from rocking too much. They're made by human hands, and then people kneel before them, thanking the God represented by them for making them. It's just ridiculous. And so that often comes up in the prophecies of the Old and New Testaments. Verse 19, not like these is he who is the portion of Jacob. That is God, the real God. He doesn't have idols. For he is the one who formed all things, and Israel is the tribe of his inheritance. He who is of hosts is his name. So there are no idols of the true and living God, because he's the real deal. Verse 20, you are my hammer and weapon of war. With you I break nations in pieces. With you I destroy kingdoms. With you I break in pieces the horse and his rider. With you I break in pieces the chariot and the charioteer. With you I break in pieces man and woman. With you I break in pieces the old man and the youth. With you I break in pieces the young man and the young woman. With you I break in pieces the shepherd and his flock. With you I break in pieces the farmer and his team. With you I break in pieces governors and commanders. So God here speaking perhaps to Babylon at the time, because Babylon is being used as God's tool of judgment throughout the Middle East, but maybe also prophetically speaking to the Medes and the Persians, who are going to be used by God to repay Babylon, or maybe any of the nations that God uses through time to exact justice against sinful people groups. But the warning should always be there. If your nation is used by God to do great things, and to even punish sinful nations, don't you dare start engaging in sin, because then you will be coming under his judgment by the hands of another nation. Just always a good thing to keep in the back of the mind. Verse 24. I will repay Babylon and all the inhabitants of Chaldea before your very eyes for all the evil that they've done in Zion, declares he who is. Behold, I am against you, O destroying mountain, declares he who is. Mountains often used to describe countries, nations. And so again, the destroying mountain here would be Babylon, used by God. Which destroys the whole earth. I will stretch out my hand against you and roll you down from the crags and make you a burnt mountain. No stone shall be taken from you for a corner, no stone for a foundation, but you shall be a perpetual waste, declares he who is. Another description of just how serious the judgment will be against Babylon. They will be so broken that they won't have much debris left. Set up a standard on the earth. Blow the trumpet among the nations. Prepare the nations for war against her. Summon against her the kingdoms. And then we have some of the kingdoms mentioned that will now be turning against the Babylonian Empire. Ararat, which is north. Meni, which I think is also up to the north. And Ashkenaz. Appoint a marshal against her. Bring her horses like bristling locusts. when you've got armed to the teeth horse riders. They're often described as being these bristling locusts. You see that also in the book of Revelation. Prepare the nations for war against her, the kings of the Medes with their governors and deputies and every land under their dominion. So there again, we know that one of the primary points of this prophetic passage is to let the Judeans know the Medes and the Persians are going to destroy the Babylonian Empire. The land trembles, verse 29, and writhes in pain, for he who is his purpose against Babylon stand to make the land of Babylon a desolation without inhabitant. The warriors of Babylon have ceased fighting. They remain in their strongholds. Their strength has failed. They have become women. Now, I apologize to all you ladies who are strong and courageous and have even served in the armed forces. This is written from their cultural standpoint when the armies were all men. And so they would often describe other armies as just being made up of civilian women. And so that's kind of the idea that's coming on here. Her dwellings are on fire, her bars are broken. One runner runs to meet another, one messenger to meet another, to tell the king of Babylon that his city is taken on every side. The fords have been seized, the crossing points on rivers. The marshes are burned with fire. The marshes have been set on fire as kind of a means of destroying resources near the city. And the soldiers are in panic. For thus says he who is of hosts, the God of Israel, the daughter of Babylon is like a threshing floor at the time when it is trodden. Yet a little while, and the time of her harvest will come. So it's all falling apart, as described here. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, has devoured me. He's crushed me. He's made me an empty vessel. This is kind of Judah talking. He swallowed me like a monster. He's filled his stomach with my delicacies. He's rinsed me out. The violence done to me and to my kinsmen be upon Babylon. Let the inhabitants of Zion say, my blood be upon the inhabitants of Chaldea. Let Jerusalem say, therefore thus says he who is, behold, I will plead your cause and take vengeance for you. I will dry up her sea and make her fountain dry, and Babylon shall become a heap of ruins, the haunt of jackals, a horror and a hissing without inhabitant. So massive destruction. They shall roar together like lions. They shall growl like lion cubs. While they are inflamed, I will prepare them a feast and make them drunk, that they may become merry. They sleep a perpetual sleep and not wake, declares he who is. I bring them down like lambs to the slaughter, like rams and male goats. A lot of mixed metaphors there. That's okay in the language of the Hebrews. So a lot of wild animal talk. Babylon is coming down by wild animals coming against it. The Medes and the Persians and others. And they'll be drunk, which is interesting. Daniel chapter 5 again. What are they doing the night that the Medes and the Persians come against the capital city? They're drinking and partying and using God's tableware to do that. And then the disembodied hand writes on the wall that judgment has arrived. Verse 41, how Babylon is taken, the praise of the whole earth seized. How Babylon has become a horror among the nations. The sea has come up on Babylon. She's covered with its tumultuous waves. So the Medes and the Persians are seen as a wave breaking against it. Her cities have become a horror, a land of drought and a desert, a land in which no one dwells and through which no son of man passes. There was a time at which ancient city of Babylon disappeared. It disappeared into the sands. Didn't even know where it was for a while. I will punish Bel in Babylon. That's a title for their chief god. And take out of his mouth what he has swallowed, meaning He's swallowed other nations, captured them, taken them into exile. And so God's going to change that. He's going to reverse it. The nations shall no longer flow to him. The wall of Babylon has fallen. Go out of her midst, my people. So this is a call of God for the future, where Zerubbabel, under the decree of Cyrus, the Medo-Persian king, will take people out of Babylon back to the promised land. Let everyone save his life from the fierce anger of he who is. Let not your heart faint, and be not fearful at the report heard in the land, when a report comes in 1 year, and afterward a report in another year. And violence is in the land, and ruler is against ruler. So don't get all caught up in the latest gossip, the latest war news, and things like that. God knows what will be going on as the Medes and Persians overwhelm the Babylonian Empire. And we have a change of power, because God knows that all this is coming, and he knows how to take his people out of the midst of that to the next part of his promise.